If you honestly let the book change your life, it will. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Read the Right Thing Book Reviews. I'm Eric. Thanks so much for watching. Today's book is The Shell, Memoirs of a Hidden Observer by Mustafa Khalifa. A comment on one of my previous videos by Omar SM3676 recommended this book. They said it is their favorite novel and that although it is full of violence, it is an excellent story that will leave you shocked or in tears at times. I'd never heard of this novel, so thank you so much for the recommendation. I'm so glad you brought this incredible book to my attention. The novel is considered a classic in the Middle East. It was also banned by the Syrian government, making it so many have to acquire the book illegally. Many young people consider this book to be the Bible of the Syrian Revolution. The author disagrees with this notion, saying in an interview that the Syrian Revolution is bigger than 1,000 novels. Mustafa Khalifa is a Syrian novelist and political writer. He was born in Syria and began practicing in political activities as a teenager. He's been to prison twice. He studied art and film in France. He's living somewhere in secret, keeping a low profile. The Shell is a novel about a young man who spends 13 years in Syrian prisons. The novel was published in 2008 and is in the form of a diary. It's a document and testimony of the gruesome, horrible experiences of political prisoners. It was first published in French, then in the author's native language, Arabic, and Paul Starkey translated the book into English. There is a debate on whether the book is more a work of fiction or whether it's more of a memoir. The case can be made that it's a sort of autofiction, like fictionalized versions of truth. Autofiction uses techniques and literary devices of fiction while maintaining the idea that the author is the main character or narrator and that the bulk of the story is based on true experiences. Other books from this subgenre that come to mind are The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which is about the Vietnam War, or even Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut about World War II and the Dresden bombing. Even though these books are works of fiction, they testify of truth and are often used by historians to represent the events they cover. Slaughterhouse-Five especially takes the genre to new places by having the narrator travel through space and time. From a 2015 article by the Syrian Observer, I learned that the author used his own experiences as well as a friend's prison experiences to write this book. So I would say it leans more towards autofiction. The novel begins with the narrator enjoying an airport beer in Paris. He's returning home to the city he loves and grew up in. Upon arrival at the Damascus airport, he is arrested and taken to prison for no apparent reason at all. He learns later that he's accused of being a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, a political party whose goal is to turn all of Syria into an Islamic state governed by Sharia law. When he pleads with the guards that there's no way he could be a member of the Muslim Brotherhood because he's in fact a Christian but also an atheist, they beat him anyway. Also, disclosing that information just proved more detrimental because now the prisoners shun him. The narrator is not only in conflict with the guards, but also his fellow prisoners. The narrator is forced inward, retreating into his shell. He spends years speaking to no one and instead observes and reflects from this shell. The shell is an apt metaphor that represents many things: the Syrian regime, prison walls, and the author's own shell that he retreats into. The narrator often wonders how people outside the prison can stand by and live their lives in their own shells while the Syrian regime arrests people with no trials. The prison walls are the shell that no one can escape from, and the narrator retreats into his own shell for survival. There are no victories in this political prison. The only victory, I guess you could say, is enduring and demonstrating a mental strength through the suffering. The narrator observes and experiences horrific prison conditions, terrible violence, torture, and humiliation that the prisoners endure from the guards. This book is not for the faint of heart. Prisoners are forced to drink sewage water, they're forced to rape each other, and the soles of their feet are beaten until bone is exposed. The only way out of the prison, it seems, is through death. There is no proving innocence through trial. Like I mentioned, the narrator is not only in prison, but exiled by other prisoners for being a Christian. He's utterly alone with only his thoughts and observations for company. Upon arrival to the prison, he's beaten so badly in the initiatory torture ceremony that he lapses into a coma that lasts months. Once he improves his health, he takes to annotating the events of the day while also daydreaming about life outside. The prisoners have no pen or paper to write, so they memorize things of importance. Some prisoners commit to memory scriptures. Others memorize the names and hometowns of the prisoners who were beaten and killed. The narrator memorizes his life in prison and all the acts of abuse and torture. Each day he would write sentences in his head and commit those sentences to memory. And at the end of 13 years, he had a full book. The descriptions of torture are tough to get through. Here's a part early on in the book where he's describing the pain. Pain, weakness, violence, force, death. My feet were swollen with the effects of Ayub's cane, and I could hardly walk. When I walked over the rough asphalt in Yard 1, I was like someone walking on nails. The municipals lifted my legs up in the falakwa, and 3 whips lashed my swollen feet. A searing wave of pain swept through my inside, rising from my belly to explode in my chest. When the whips came down, I couldn't breathe. My lungs suffered convulsions. They closed around the trapped air and stopped working. When the second wave of pain exploded in my chest, the air trapped in my lungs exploded, producing a scream of pain that I could feel escaping from my skull, from my eyes. I screamed and screamed, my legs nailed to the air. All my attempts to move them, to pull them away, failed. They were becoming detached from me, a mere source of pain, connected by a thread to the bottom of my abdomen and chest. Clashing waves of pain, a pain that started in the legs and then spread upwards through the base of the abdomen to the chest before breaking in the head, producing a scream of pain, of terror, and humiliation. And that's just the first pages, and not even as bad as it gets. And I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, that's like a 5 or 6 from this book. The writing is simple, brutal, and claustrophobic when detailing the harsh conditions and torture. The prisoners lived and slept side by side for years with no space and no comfort. They suffered through brutal heat and harsh cold in the desert. But the writing can also be beautiful when the narrator reflects emotionally on his conditions. I reviewed the past and dreamed of the future. It became a habit, creating these daydreams that I greatly enjoyed. I became addicted to the daydreams. I would build a dream bit by bit, formulating the small and precise details, sketching them and correcting them. I would spend long hours, sitting or lying down, lost to the real world, living a beautiful reality in which everything was sweet, simple, and easy. In every daydream, there would always be a woman, every woman I'd ever passed or who'd passed me, and the cells of my body would be on fire. I would mingle the past with the present, recalling the most passionate moments and reconstruct them, inventing new situations. I would toss and turn, unable to sleep, waiting until the end of the night when I could go to the lavatory to masturbate. It was the only solution to be able to sleep. If anyone had asked me at that moment to sum up prison in a single phrase, I would have said, prison is a woman, or rather, her searing absence. I thought about that last sentence for a long time after I read it. Yeah, there's something poetic about that. Watching this evolution of what he desires is moving and insightful to what really matters in life. That was still somewhat early on in his imprisonment, so he was still daydreaming about women, which is understandable. If you're attracted to women and suddenly that's taken away from you, that's going to be a big absence in your life. But how he wrote that, I just thought that was very poetic. Prison is a woman, or rather her searing absence. So I assume most men would go through the same evolution. Of course, his hunger and eventual starvation creates within him a desire of food. He sort of shifts his daydreams from women more towards food. But after the years, those desires of women and food begin to fade. Then he just wants to hear his own voice. Then he simply daydreams about seeing printed words on a paper. Going 13 years without reading created a thirst for just reading a newspaper or anything. And then he also mentions things we take advantage of, we don't truly appreciate, like smiling at someone or just saying hi to someone or just being free to go outside. Those are the things that he daydreams about instead of women and food. The simple things like that you take advantage of every day. After spending years with zero contact with most inmates, he becomes a shell. He retreats into this shell like a tortoise. His only friend is a doctor, but their communication has to be sparse and clandestine. It's only when another inmate needs an emergency appendicitis does this narrator prove to the others that he is not a government spy and that he can be trusted. He gives a watch that he snuck into prison to the doctor, who uses the sharp points to operate on this prisoner. Finally, after this act, he gains some trust with his fellow prisoners and he can finally form some relationships. Many of the prisoners were college educated and there were multiple doctors imprisoned. From that 2015 interview, Mustafa says this is because the Syrian regime fears and knows that the educated class is capable of recognizing and fixing the problems in their country. After the narrator gives the doctor the watch, the narrator finally gains a friend. The friendship between these two men is beautiful and a testament that people need relationships. We're social beings. These two have conversations about everything, and finally the narrator has someone to talk to. The narrator first recognizes this man as just a friend, but he starts to feel more than friendship. He starts to feel love and even sexual thoughts for this man. This messes with him a little, and he contemplates whether his circumstances are making him feel this way or if it's something natural within him. Sadly, one day his friend is beaten so badly that his personality completely changes. And from that day forward, they no longer have long, deep conversations. The narrator also discovers a hole in the wall near his bed where he can observe all of the tortures and all the other events in the courtyard. He keeps this a secret for years. He would wrap a blanket around himself and spend hours just looking out of this hole and observing what was happening. But after he gained some friends, he allowed others to witness what was going on in the courtyard. After 13 years in this prison, he is transferred to other prisons until he is finally let free. He's joyous to finally see his family, but now he must free himself from the trauma and psychological harm of being a prisoner, something that is not easy. The narrator continues this same lifestyle outside prison that he had inside prison. His family tries setting him up on dates with women, but he is just disinterested. To this day, the author says he misses certain social and human aspects of prison. Years after he'd been free from prison, he goes to the town to visit his one friend, and he takes along with him the doctor. His friend is quiet, not really saying much, just deeply staring out at the sea. What happens during this visit is shocking and one of the saddest things I've read. This is the type of book that you remember. It's a marker in your life. You're different after you read it. If you honestly let the book change your life, it will. I hope I always remember this book anytime I feel sad or depressed about something in my own life. I understand now why that comment urged me to read this book, and I'm glad that they left this comment. Reading this harrowing and brutal book was strangely cathartic for me. I read the bulk of this book over the holiday season, a joyous, but also somewhat depressing time. On social media during Christmas and New Year's Eve, I see a lot of people posting about how grateful they are, or they post recaps, showing how good of a year they had. I also see a lot of people posting about how the holiday season can be a tough time for people. There's seasonal depression because of the cold weather, short days, and lack of sunlight. And also a lot of people are just struggling these days. There's a pandemic of loneliness amongst men, and women are suffering through anxiety caused by social media. Maybe there's an occasional or constant voice in your head telling you that your life sucks compared to the lives of others. You're not good or as cool as everyone else portrays themselves to be. It's all complete bullshit. Everyone's just faking. But when you compare your life to the narrator of this book, you have zero choice. You don't have a choice at all, but to be grateful for your freedoms and lifestyle. Because like I mentioned, something as simple as just reading a billboard or smiling at someone or having the freedom to leave and go to a coffee shop, these are the things that were taken away from this narrator. And he had to endure these devastating, horrific acts of violence. I needed to read this book to truly appreciate how good life is. Because when you compare your life to the narrator's life, you have no choice but to count all the blessings in your life. And you really appreciate what you have. Not to discount our own challenges. Maybe we do feel lonely or sad, but when in comparison to this book, our lives are cake. So yeah, this book was definitely the right thing for me. And I think I read it at the perfect time. If you like prison literature, autofiction, and your mental well-being won't be absolutely crushed at the horrible violence, then definitely check it out. I'll read this one again at some point. I think this is a good book to revisit. So that was my review of The Shell by Mustafa Khalifa. I hope you enjoyed this book review. If you found it helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button. Or if you know someone who would benefit from seeing this video, please send it to them. If you've read this book, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, read the right thing.